She's lying. She's pretending. She wants to destroy a man. In 1612, Artemisia Gentileschi walked into a courtroom as a victim and walked out as the suspect. Because in that world, when a man was accused, the question was never, what did he do? The question was, what did she do to deserve it? And to prove she was telling the truth, they did something so cruel it sounds made up. They tied cords around her fingers, and they started tightening. Now look at the painting. Don't look at the face. Look at Judith's arm. It isn't delicate, it isn't hesitant. It's tense, muscular, locked like a lever. Her hand isn't asking for forgiveness. It grips, it controls, it finishes the job. And the blood, it doesn't trickle like some symbolic scene. It bursts in jets, stains the sheets, floods the dress, marks the skin, like the paint was forced to obey physical truth. This doesn't feel like faith. It feels like a verdict. And once you understand who's on that bed, the painting stops being biblical. That courtroom didn't want justice. It wanted control. Rome, early 17th century. A world where a woman's honor was worth more than a woman's life, and where the only thing worse than being violated was speaking about it out loud, because to society the crime wasn't rape. The crime was the scandal. Artemisia was only 19, the daughter and student of Artemisia Gentileschi, raised inside studios, pigments, and commissions. But the man who was supposed to teach her also had access to what he should have never touched. Agostino Tassi, a known painter, a friend of her father, hired as her tutor. In 1611, he invaded her space, chased away the chaperone, and raped Artemisia. And as if that wasn't enough, he did what so many men do when they know the system is on their side. He promised marriage to silence it all. The standard solution of the time. An elegant lie meant to bury real violence. When her father took the case to court in 1612, the trial didn't become an attack on the aggressor. It became a hunt for the victim, and to decide whether Artemisia deserved to be believed. The court crossed an unthinkable line. They ordered the young woman to be subjected to judicial torture right there during her testimony. Not because she was a criminal, but because in that world, a woman's words only mattered if they were tested through physical pain. And that's why this painting wasn't born as decorative art. It was born as an answer. Because after you survive a system that tries to break you in front of your attacker, you don't paint a pretty Judith. You paint a reckoning. And the detail that gives it away isn't in Judith's face. It's in who Artemisia chose to place in the role of Holofernes. And she chose him without hiding it. Because if you look at Holofernes' face, you're not looking at some generic biblical general. You're looking at a real man, a man with weight, with flesh, with presence, and features many historians identify as Agostino Tassi. Now look back at Judith. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't look fragile. She isn't disgusted by what she's doing, the way she is in earlier versions of this scene. She's executing. Judith's arms are tense, muscular, pressing him down like she already decided this isn't symbolic. One hand grips his hair with brute force, yanking his head back into a position of total control. The other works the blade like a technical task, steady, precise, inevitable. This painting has a difference you can feel in your throat. Artemisia paints real physical strength. This isn't a woman saved by God. This is a woman who learned the hard way that nobody is coming to save you. Now, look at the blood. This is the kind of detail that destroys any beautiful reading of the work. The blood doesn't trickle softly, like a clean little touch meant not to shock anyone. It explodes, in arterial bursts soaking the sheets, staining the dress, even hitting Judith's chest. And she doesn't flinch. She doesn't wipe it away. She doesn't step back. She finishes the job. And this isn't just Baroque realism. It's intentional. It's visual humiliation. Because the blood here isn't decoration. It's evidence. It's like Artemisia is saying, you want truth, then take it. But there's another detail that's even more aggressive, because Judith isn't alone. Beside her is Abra, the servant. And in Artemisia's version, she isn't some old, distant witness. She's young, strong, present. She holds Holofernes down with both hands like a real accomplice, like someone who came to help end this. That choice changes everything, because Artemisia didn't just paint revenge. She painted a correction of the world, a version of the story where a woman isn't left alone in the moment she needs someone most. And then the painting throws a question in your face without saying a single word. Is this faith or is it testimony? Because once you understand what she did with these faces, this strength and this blood, the painting stops being biblical. It becomes a document. And that's exactly why, at the time, this painting wasn't seen as genius. It was seen as too dangerous to be displayed under clean light. If this painting is already getting under your skin, hit like. Subscribe to Behind the Frame and turn on notifications on. Because some works weren't made to be admired. They were made to serve as a warning. And that's when the world tried to tame what Artemisia had done. Because there's a difference between painting violence and painting revenge with a face, a name, and intent. In the 17th century, people did accept blood in art. The Baroque loved drama, loved shadow, loved martyrdom. But there was one silent rule nobody wrote down. They just obeyed it. Violence could exist as long as it didn't feel personal. Artemisia broke that rule like snapping a bone. She didn't paint a modest Judith, almost apologizing for killing. She painted a Judith who looks like she's correcting an injustice in the world with her own hands. And the message is so direct, it still makes people uncomfortable today. When Judith pulls his hair, it isn't just to cut better, it's to dominate. Now look at the composition. Holofernes' body is large, heavy, taking up space like a man who's used to being in control. But it doesn't matter. He's trapped between two women. Artemisia turns the bedroom into a trap, and the bed doesn't feel intimate. It feels like an execution table. And there's a detail most people miss because they are hypnotized by the throat being cut. Look at the sheets. The white becomes a battlefield. This isn't a biblical scene. It's a crime scene. The blood isn't there just to shock. It's there to contaminate the entire space. Like Artemisia is making a point that real violence never stays contained. It spreads, it stains, it leaves a mark. Now comes the layer that humiliates even more. According to some historians, Artemisia closely observed how blood behaves, the trajectory of the spray, the arc it draws through the air. It's not random, it's almost technical, almost scientific. An obsession with getting right what most painters only hinted at. And here's the insane curiosity. There's an interpretation that this precision might be linked to the science of the time, and even to Galileo Galilei's ideas about parabolic trajectory. It's not a complete scholarly consensus, but the suggestion exists. And it's terrifying for what it implies, because it would mean Artemisia didn't paint this with rage alone. She painted it with method. She took trauma, took a religious symbol, took the body of a powerful man, and treated it like a visual experiment where the truth had to feel unavoidable. But there's a problem. The more you understand how calculated this was, the less the painting feels like catharsis, and the more it starts to feel like a sentence. And if this was a sentence, then the question changes. Who signed the verdict first? Artemisia, or the court that destroyed her name before she ever had the chance? Because to understand what this painting is really saying, you have to go back to the moment when she wasn't holding a brush. She was holding ropes. Because before Artemisia turned blood into paint, she was turned into evidence. In 1612, when her father decided to take the case to court, the trial didn't become an attack on the rapist. It became an interrogation of her body, her honesty, as if violence could only be real if the victim was perfect enough to deserve belief. And then comes the cruelest detail of this entire story. They didn't torture the man who was accused. They tortured the painter. The instrument even had an almost innocent name, Sibylle. Ropes tied around her fingers, tightened slowly, crushing the bones. A method designed to extract truth through fear. Now think about the level of perversity here. Artemisia's fingers were her career. They were her future. They were the only place she still had control. And they still tightened the cords. The logic was simple and sick. If she was lying, she would break. If she was guilty, she would pull back. And as her fingers were being crushed, she looked towards the man who destroyed her and screamed a line that feels like it was written to become an eternal verdict. "It's true, it's true, it's true. This is the ring you give me, and these are your promises." That isn't just desperation. That's someone trying to survive in a world where truth has to bleed before it's allowed to exist. And this is the moment when Judith Beheading Holofernes stops being a violent painting. It becomes a psychological reenactment. Because when you return to the canvas after knowing this, you realize what Artemisia did. She takes the moment she lost control and paints a universe where she never loses it. Judith doesn't beg. Judith doesn't hesitate. Judith doesn't shake. And Abra, the accomplice? This is one of the smartest, most personal choices in the entire painting. In many earlier versions, like Caravaggio's, the maid is almost an afterthought, an old woman watching, like she's outside the action. In Artemisia's version, she's not. Abra is young, strong, involved. She grabs the body, holds him down, helps finish the job. And that carries a venomous subtext, because in real life, the governess who should have protected Artemisia didn't. She was ignored, left alone inside her own home. So Artemisia rewrites the world the way it should have been. In her painting, she isn't alone. She has someone beside her, someone who holds the monster still while she cuts. And at that point, the image becomes almost impossible to unsee, because the violence isn't here as spectacle. It's here as correction, as justice delivered by hand. But the world was never going to let a woman paint this and walk away untouched. And that's where this story truly becomes an art crime case. Not because Artemisia committed a crime, but because the world tried to turn what she created into something too indecent to exist in daylight. And some people literally couldn't handle looking at it. Because beneath that red, that weight, that cut, there's a question no courtroom ever managed to answer. Is this faith? Or is it pure revenge, using the Bible as an alibi? If this were just a biblical scene, it would be just another painting meant to decorate palaces. But the cruelest detail in this story is that human justice failed. Agostino Tassi was sentenced to exile and never served it. He stayed free, kept working, kept living as if nothing had happened. The court cleared him in practice. So Artemisia sentenced him in eternity. She created a kind of justice that doesn't need a judge. A justice that happens again and again, every single day for 400 years, every time someone looks into his terrified face on this canvas. That's why this painting still feels so uncomfortable. The blood here isn't decoration, it's consequence. Artemisia didn't paint a woman saved by God. She painted a woman who saves herself. And now the final question is yours, knowing about the assault, the torture, and the impunity. Can you look at this and see Baroque art? Or do you see it for what it really is? A revenge that never ends? Tell me. In the comments, do you think Artemisia went too far? Or was this the only justice she was ever going to get? If this investigation was worth your time, leave a like. And if you want to keep uncovering the forbidden stories museums would rather hide, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll be reading your answers in the comments. Welcome to Behind the Frame.